So there's a couple of points to recap. We've already introduced ECL, which is the SNOMED query language. Allows you to query the hierarchy and use the attributes as well. There's many use cases for ECL. Maintaining subsets is a key one for implementers, constraining the areas of the hierarchy that you want to be used for data input. There's other use cases like defining the substrate for maps or for translation. Also to support clinical decision support and data analytics. And we had a demo of that from Anna. So how can ECL be supported in a standard way? And this is where terminology services come in. And ECL can be executed using a FHIR terminology server. So I'm going to introduce terminology services and the HL7 FHIR standard, and we'll look at some implementation examples. As before, just raise your hand or shout out if you have any questions. So why even use terminology services? You don't have to. You could take the RF2 files from SNOMED and import them into your databases and implement everything yourself. It would work. But terminology services are there to standardize the process and make it easier for you. There's open source terminology services available, and there's also some commercial options. SNOMED International has 2 free-to-use open source terminology servers. So search algorithms are really key for effective data entry for clinicians. You need to make sure that they're doing minimum typing and they can search all active synonyms. And we need to cater for things like spelling mistakes and everything else. So this is where terminology services can really help. The navigation of the hierarchy and kind of queries require optimization to work well and be fast. And of course, the terminologies are updated, very frequently. I think in France, it may be less of a problem because I think you're planning on a once-a-year release of SNOMED. But also, it's a good separation of concerns to have a service that just deals with the terminology. So here's a very sort of brief and high level.
Just interrupting. For the moment, SNOMED CT is not available on FHIR, but we are planning to make it accessible through the SMT FHIR API. Good practices rules are for small terminologies. You can retrieve them locally and use it locally. But for huge terminologies such as SNOMED CT, you can directly request on our terminology server. So once SNOMED will be available on it, but it should be on this year. So we'll keep you up to date.
Thank you. So we usually recommend that there's no single point of failure. There may be a national terminology server that's kind of used to help distribute the content, but there really should be a terminology server, regionally or maybe for your hospital to support queries and to support the EHR directly. So why use a standard like FHIR? Standardizing the API that you use to access terminology services provides flexibility in your architecture because it simplifies the integration because there's off-the-shelf libraries that can help you make those queries. And it prevents any kind of vendor lock-in because you should be able to switch terminology server without changing your client code. Anna kind of touched on this in the session before. in the UI demo, we could switch between the Snowstorm terminology server and Onto server, and all the user search and the constraints in the user interface still worked. So it's nice to use a standard like FHIR. So the HL7 FHIR standard, I'm sure you're very aware of it already, and it covers many parts of the healthcare system. There's one small module in level 2, which is the terminology, which we'll dive into in a minute. But the terminology provides the codes for some of the key fields within the clinical diagnoses and medication resources. So within the terminology module, there are 3 main resources. There's the code systems. So these, of course, could be any code system. It could be SNOMED CT, LOINC, ICD, MEDRA, something else. We've also got value sets. So these are sets of codes within a code system, and concept maps. So it could be a map between SNOMED and ICD, SNOMED and MEDRA, or something else. And each of these resources has operations, things you can do with them, like functions. So the code system allows you to look up a code, and when you do a lookup, you tend to get all the details of a concept. So for SNOMED, you would get all the descriptions, all the relationships. You might get a list of parents. You can also validate a code. So that's about testing whether that code is within that version of that code system that you've selected. And you can also do, for SNOMED, you can do a subsumption test. Is this concept a type of infectious disease or some other? So you can see if they subsume each other within the hierarchy. In the value set resources, we can do 2 main operations. We've got validate code again, which checks if the code is in the value set, but we can also do expand. And this is where SNOMED implements a lot of its, it exposes a lot of the power of SNOMED through the value set expand operation. So we can expand value sets that don't exist yet using the ECL query language. So we can kind of create a value set which is constrained by the query and expand it like all in one request. That's how we get the results of an ECL. And lastly, the concept map only really has one operation, which is translate from one code system to another. Is there any questions yet? Nope. So we're staying high level. The first thing you can do with code systems is to list the code systems that are in your terminology server. If they're SNOMED code systems, you need to pay attention to which edition you have, which national extension and which version. You can use the title parameter to filter the code systems. I'm going to need to find a solution or type one-handed because this mic's an I. I'm going to go to the SNOMED International terminology server, which is kind of a demo server, really. We can play with it, but we mustn't use it in any commercial systems or production systems. So I'm going to paste the URL for this, and maybe you can play along with me. I'll paste this into the chat. So it's snowstorm.snowmedtools.org/FHIR. And I've added to that the code system resource. So if we hit enter, we get around 200 code systems are loaded in here. They're all SNOMED CT code systems. There's many versions of many national extensions. And these are all the code systems that are loaded into the browser, the international browser. Many of them have many versions. So there's a whole long list. We can use the title parameter to filter. So for example, if I say title equals international, then it cuts down to 70 versions. We've got the international editions here. And in the rest of this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the use of this identifier here, the URL. That's what type of code system we're using. And of course, this URL means it's SNOMED. And we've also got the version. And this URL means we're using a specific edition and a specific release of that edition. So that's about listing code systems. We can do the same with listing value sets and listing concept maps. But most of the value sets you probably use won't really exist as value sets because they'll be created at runtime using ECL. We're going to first look at the lookup operation. So this is how you would look up all the details of a specific concept. I'm going to, so the parameters here are the system, which code system am I looking into? And here we're giving the generic SNOMED URI. So it could be any version of SNOMED really. And the code, so this is the SNOMED concept. There's one other parameter we can use here, which is common, and it's the version parameter. If I don't set the version parameter, then the terminology server is just going to use its default edition. And for this instance of Snowstorm, that is the international edition. So I'm going to open that URL now, and I'll paste it in the chat in case you're following along. So this is looking up heart attack, myocardial infarction. Every time you make a request to a FHIR terminology server, it should respond with the name of the edition that or the code system that you've looked up, the system, just to confirm which system you've actually found and is responding. Oh, nice. I've got a hands-free option. Let's see if it works with a mug, high tech. It works. The system and also the version. So we didn't ask for a specific version, but the terminology server is letting me know that the version of SNOMED used in this response is this module, which I know is the international edition, and it's the June release. So it's actually only 5 days old, this one. It's very new. A really important property in here is the inactive flag. If concepts are not active, they shouldn't be used for data entry. They may already exist in your healthcare records. You may need to analyze them. There's lots of other information in here. We've got all the synonyms for this concept. And we've also got down the bottom, we've got all the relationships and things somewhere. It's huge. I don't really use the lookup operation much, but we've seen it. So this is a good time to introduce the URI standard. So in SNOMED, we've formalized the URIs that should be used to reference certain things. For example, you can reference a specific edition of SNOMED by using snomed.info/SCT and then the edition identifier. You can reference a specific version of an edition by adding /version and the date stamp. And there's many other URIs to reference different things within SNOMED, but these are the ones that are commonly used in the FHIR interface. So going back to our lookup example, we can actually look up the same concept in the Belgian edition. So this is only really important when you've got a terminology server that contains many national extensions, which is maybe a bit unusual. But in this one we're using for demo does have many national extensions. I'm going to open that URL and I'll paste it in the chat as well. So here we've added the version parameter, and we're asking for the Belgian release of the same concept. And in the response, we can see the Belgian edition has been used. It's released from May. And we should see some French translations in here because they're published in Belgian. Well, it's Belgian French, it's different, but. So we've got some translated terms here. These will be useful for search and display, of course. Okay, so that's lookup. But how do we search across SNOMED? We can't use lookup for that. Lookup's only when we know the SNOMED code. If we want to search, we need to use a value set expand operation. And there's a few special value sets that SNOMED has. And one of them is a value set of all of SNOMED, all concepts in SNOMED. And you would never really use that in real life in a clinical system, but it's useful as an implementer to be able to search all of SNOMED to find some concept that you want to use in ECL or something else. So the URI for this special value set that contains all the concepts in SNOMED is snomed.info/SCT. If you want a specific edition, you can add the edition identifier. And then it starts to look a bit strange, but this is the FHIR standard. I didn't create it or design it. We've got a question mark and FHIR_VS. So that means the value set of everything in SNOMED. And when we do a value set expand, we can specify which display language we want. And we'll start with English, but then we'll change it. We can also specify a filter. And this filter is to support search and user interfaces. The UI demo that we showed earlier uses this filter so that when the clinician types in, some prefix of some words, they're used to filter the results and the search results that they see. I'm going to open this one and I'll paste it in the chat. So here we're searching all of SNOMED using the display language of English, and we're filtering by myo infar. So of course we've matched myocardial infarction and many others. You'll notice that this is a real mixture of stuff. This myocardial infarction is of course a disorder. We've also got one here that says FH, and that's a family history. So that's a situation. We've got many other types of things in here. So this is an unconstrained search across all hierarchies. You wouldn't usually use it. I'm going to switch the display language now to FR. Again, we're using the Belgian edition, and I'll run it again, and we can see that the display on each concept has switched over to being in the French language, and also the filter that we used is now only matching on French words. So that's how search can be implemented. And I'm just going to pop over to the UI demo. It's snomed.org/UI, because we can see some of the same requests being made from this user interface. If I open the developer network panel here and search for append, and I'm using a search in a procedures data entry input. So I'm getting appendicectomy. And we can see here that the user interface made I need to expand this if I can. It's tiny. The user interface made a value set expand request. I'm looking for the parameters. Oh, yeah. And there's some ECL here which is used. So we'll show an example of that next. There's lots of percentages because it's URL encoded. It's not easy to read. But essentially, we're doing a value set expand using an ECL, and we're doing a filter of append. And that's how we're getting our search results.